Hi everyone, welcome to M4G Advocacy Media. You're watching Journey's guest updates, which is a new series we started. My name is Mark. I'm a brown man with brown shirt and brown background. That's a lot of brown. And I've got painting and shelf with some knickknacks behind me. I'm wearing glasses. Crystal?
I'm Crystal. I have on a black shirt with a black and white shirt with the red stripes and a brown background and a clock on the shelf. And I'm a white woman with glasses, brown eyes, and brown hair.
Um, Today we're catching up with one of our favorite guests from almost a year ago, Lisa Lewis. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Mark and Crystal. So, I'm Lisa, and I have very fair skin that matches my very pale pink scarf with a pale pink shirt, and I'm wearing glasses and have kind of reddish brown hair. And my background is a very fuzzy, faded Zoom technique of fading your background to fuzziness because my office is in an attic filled with clutter. So I've chosen the Zoom background that fades your background so no one can see how messy my attic office is. Nice to see you two again after almost a year.
Nice to see
You too. Thank you so much for all of your support. And it was so awesome to keep up with you and what you're doing. And we want to know. There's so much to ask you. I'm so excited.
Well, it's good to see both of you too. And since I did our first pre-interview and the full interview, which a lot of people that follow my website, hikingautism.com, a lot of people watched those interviews on your YouTube channel. And really, I felt like that was very nice for the people that like my website to tap in and see the broader scope of disability issues that your podcast covers. I think that was really eye-opening for the friends and followers of because my website relates to autism, because I have, as you know from our previous conversations, I have two sons, but my younger son is affected by severe autism. So that was the focus of our discussion before. And of course, my life is still 10 months later very affected by autism. But I have to say thank you to you two because number one, being exposed to your podcast was great for me to sort of get a broader view of disability issues that I wanted to be more aware of and more in tune with, because it reflects some of the things I'm trying to do for the autism community, helped me to see the broader scope of what you talk about. So that's one point. And the other one that I wanted to mention is that after doing my podcast interview with you two, I also had an opportunity to do another podcast interview with a person. The host his podcast is not about disabilities. It's about inspiring people when they've gone through difficult challenges in life. And I thought, oh, perfect match for me. Had a great conversation with him. But as it turns out, this podcast host happens to be blind. And he mentions that a little bit in his bio, describing where he comes from for his podcast viewers. But that's not the focus of his podcast. It just happens to be a fact about him. But it really, since talking with you and doing that interview, it just made me all the more aware of that. Because my son's autistic, I focus on the autism issues. But I realized that there are a lot of things that I've been missing when I talk about my son's issues, because he's so visually oriented. I talk about visual supports and beautiful nature photographs and things that I use in my tools for my son. And I thought, well, gosh, that podcast host can't see those things. So I thought that maybe I need to broaden the way I share information. And I'm not quite sure how to do that well yet, but it just, speaking with you and doing that podcast interview, which were both great experiences, made me want to be better at interacting with people with a wide range of issues, because sometimes we don't see that or people don't tell us that. And I just want to be more aware of what I can do to be better.
Yeah, I've talked to so many people recently. I love that you're wanting to figure out how to do that. And I can get you in contact with several people that know some of that information. So,
That'd be great. Yes, thank you. I would like, because I'd like to add some steps into my website or in the messages that I share there to just broaden people's horizons a little bit.
Yeah.
yeah.
We're really grateful for that because that's the I mean there are a lot of practical steps that everyone has to go through, but wanting to be a better person is the first key step. And then the rest kind of just falls into place.
Exactly.
You know, because we share enough sort of situational things and we've spoken before, all of this makes sense to us when we say it. But an interesting experience that might be interesting to you too, because you do this podcast. One of the things I've been trying to do from before we spoke is I've been working on a book project because I'd like to, we talked previously about isolation for people in the disabilities world, and for our son and for our family, isolation has been a big issue. So for years now, I've been trying to get a book ready to try to get a book published that's going to share some message about that isolation as a individual and as a family, and to be able to share that. So the process of working on a book is very daunting and hard to do. But in the process of doing that, so that's still something I'm working on. But in the process of doing that, I recently, sometime in the last 2 or 3 months, I took a class from a professional, like publishing, marketing kind of person. And she gives a class about how people who are trying to get a message out, what are the techniques you can use to do, say, a radio interview or a podcast interview or do an article. So she was training, most of them were would-be authors, and she was training people about how to interact in an interview. And she asked for people to share their stories. And I told this group, and they were all from the normal world. They all had some sort of a book topic, none of which was about any kind of disability. It was just the broader scope of things people might write a book about. I was the only one that was dealing with disabilities. And so they were asking for people to share some insight they'd gotten from the experience they had done doing some kind of an interview. And I said, well, because my son has a very difficult time processing language, I have to learn to speak slower because my instinct is to speak 1,000 miles an hour and to jump in and interrupt people and to not wait for people. So that's a challenge for me. In the normal world, I kind of bulldoze my way in, speaking too quickly and not leaving space for people. That's already a challenge for me. But if you have any partner that you're speaking with who has any kind of language processing issues, whether it's auditory, that it takes longer to process the words coming in, or if it takes more time for whatever, like muscle connection and brain word connection to get language out. For me, that's a challenge I've had to work with in this situation. And so I mentioned that that's something when I do a podcast with somebody who's related to disabilities, that I have to think about who the listeners are or who I'm speaking to, that I need to mellow out my speaking speed and wait. And then I mentioned also the podcast interviewer who happened to be blind, and that there were extra issues in terms of that with setting things up, and that I was talking all about visual things and not, I thought, well, he can't really appreciate, how can I share better with him? So anyways, this person who's been in the profession of teaching people how to do PR and marketing interviews, she just stopped and she goes, I have never thought about any of those issues once ever. And that really hit me, that she's a professional in that field, teaching people to go out in the world and do, interviews and communications. And those thoughts had never occurred to her. And it made me realize how isolated our pocket of the world is in the disabilities world. That really surprised me.
Yeah.
Can we slow down and unpack one of the points you brought up? and which is a key thing that most people miss. And let's just speak in the context of disability, which is I heard you say that you realize that you need to change because your son needed that, right?
Mhm.
Most people look at it like you're the one who's disabled, you need to change, right? And then they proceed going about fixing them or giving them a recipe to fix themselves.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a great point. And recently, and I recently means just in the last 2 or 3 years, I see people address that issue that you've brought up. So for example, with my son, even up to 10 years ago, the message was always, oh, we're going to find a way to fix him. All the kids on the autism spectrum, we can find ways that are going to, like, if you do A, B, and C, if you do this special diet, not that those don't help, it's helped us a lot, but if you do the special diet and you do this special repetitive training and you do this special visual thing or certain kinds of therapy, we're going to fix your child to be functionally independent. Well, I'm sorry, but that puts the pressure of failure on my shoulders as a parent and my son's shoulders, that no matter how much of that we do, he may not become functionally independent. But that doesn't mean we're failures. That is, we do our best to help him be more independent and do the best he can. But he's who he is, where he is, and you have to have love and patience and acceptance that you're going to do the best you can, but you can't expect a person to become normal. It just doesn't work that way. And in recent years, I see much more messaging that it's like, we have to meet people where they are, that the world doesn't have to change every person, but maybe the world could change a little bit to match people where they are. And so that's been helpful for us, but there's not enough of that.
And maybe the problem isn't that people aren't becoming normal, it's us not being able to question what is normal and answer that question.
Right.
And why that even exists and is so embedded in the way we go about living.
Well, go ahead, Crystal.
We talked a little bit ago about the pandemic and the different issues that arose from that situation. And, you would certainly think that, that was like 5 minutes ago. No, you would think people would remember how they felt and how isolated they were and how hard it was for them to not be able to go out and do things and be normal, and that for some people that is never gonna change, and they go, and the normal people go right back to what they were doing before, and with forgetting about how they felt.
What that isolation felt like. So your point's great, and that opens up a big discussion. But then going back to what Mark was saying as well on the same theme, because that's a good segue, is what's normal? And I think that people with disabilities, whether you could see it or not, for example, for our family, at a glance, you can't see that there's something off with our son, but within about a minute, he may do some kind of unpredictable behavior or vocalize in a way that's kind of loud and not appropriate for the place. Within a short time, people say, oh, something's off with that kid. And I say kid, but he's 26 at this point. So I think that from not too distant past, people that were different just didn't go out into society. And even if they had the physical capability or the physical supports, that a lot of people, like those of us in the autism community, sometimes our kids' behavior just gets so out there that it's really hard to face people staring at us and thinking that our kid is just bad behavior when it's not just that. So what I'm saying is, in Mark's comment about what's normal, is unless people are out in the world and people can see people with differences, nobody's going to see that as normal. So over the past years, we've fought really hard, and it's still difficult for us, but we've fought very hard to get our son Sean out. And so people see us, and people see us having to guide him. I mean, when we walk around, there's two adults holding the hands on both sides of our 26-year-old son, and people get that, oh, well, that young man must have some sort of disability. So we're out and people see us. And now people are just kind of like understanding and see that kind of thing. But that's just one example of just that people need to be out in the world, but it's hard to be out in the world because sometimes we get a weird, feedback from people, like staring or comments or something. Not so often, but it happens. So one of the things that I've been trying to work on, and again, it's mostly within the autism world, is that in our local, so I'm in San Francisco. So in our broader San Francisco Bay Area, there's there's an autism society, the local autism society group. They try to have activities where families feel that they can sort of create a mini normal environment for their families. They just had an event where there were like 400 people, and it was all families. Well, I thought, I did not go, but I thought, wow, that was a big event to organize. And those families were able to go. There was a DJ and singing and a little talent show. I was like, oh, those families went and had like a food party, picnic, music thing. And for that 3 or 4 hours, however long it was, they had an artificially created normal environment for them where they just felt free to be themselves. And that's great. And for that Autism Society, one of the things I try to do is because my website's about hiking and we enjoy that for our son, I once a month lead hikes for families. So any family that wants to kind of try hiking or just join a hike they've never been on, I do that once a month. And it gives people, caregivers and the individuals, a chance to feel like they're just in a normal group. They don't feel like the outsiders in that. But again, we're kind of having to create that artificially. So what I hope through those efforts, like when the Autism Society has events like that, or my hikes through them, that the families that were able to overcome that sort of shyness or fear, there is anxiety about going out in the world, that if they could go out for a group event, for a hike or a party like that at some big park, maybe next time they feel confident enough or brave enough to just go out as their individual family, even though there's not the support group of all the other people with similar disabilities. But I think that's it's still a challenge for my family. So, and I'm for the autism situation, but I know this is an issue there's different layers of issues for the different disabilities people may have.
Yeah. It's really difficult to get out there without an adequate support, depending on who the person is. Because whether it's said directly or indirectly, there's a sense that you don't belong here. Whether it's their movie posters for movies with no disabled people in them, or whatever, or somebody comes up to your face and says, yeah, you shouldn't be here, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of shocking to think that there's still people that might do that, but I guess that's true when our son was younger and we were just realizing that, because sometimes autism sneaks up on you as a kid ages out of like the 3-year-old tantrum level. You're like, oh, this isn't a 3-year-old tantrum. There's something else going on here. And as time went on, like we would get the looks and the stares or comments, and it really made us not want to go out. But then, you work on it to help your child have better behavior, or at least less disruptive behavior. And then we're just out there. I mean, we go hiking with our son every Saturday, every Sunday, every non-school or like post-school program day. He's out.
That's great.
Well, and speaking of the pandemic, he was out on a trail 365 days in a row because there was no
Wow.
program support for him during that time.
Yeah.
So, we're out there on a trail someplace, and if people who are on a hiking trail see a quirky family with his kid holding hands with both his parents, so be it. That's us, and we're out there. So we've become a little bit braver about it, but honestly, this is sort of a little mini confession for me. We're still intimidated and a little bit isolated, because even when we see those big party type events for autism families listed, we're just kind of like, oh, that sounds overwhelming. I don't think that would be a good match for us. Sean would be probably overwhelmed. Just the thought of it makes us tired. So even for our family that helps lead other families to come out, we're still overwhelmed. There's things that we still don't feel kind of brave enough to face. It's exhausting to go out.
I kind of want to touch on that. I know we were going to talk about the pandemic thing, but it is so interesting to me. A lot more people right now are being diagnosed with autism, and a lot more people are accepting it and not chastising when you have that in your life, so it must be very you must be able to look at that very optimistically, and it must be a lot easier to deal with that, having more support and more people that are willing to be understanding towards it, toward what you do in hiking autism, and for your son too, because there's more people around him that are like him or understand why he's doing what he's doing, or they're doing more research on it, or because they have somebody in their life that deals with it, or they're just they want to be a better person and be more they want to be I can't think of the word,
more empathetic.
Yeah, to the fact that there's different people have different abilities and struggles, and they can't live in a narrow lens,
That's a great point. And that brings to mind two things. One is an example of that is my husband's Japanese, his family's all in Japan. My family's from the East Coast. They're actually spread around every place except here on the West Coast. So both of us don't have the support of our extended families, except that I had one set of cousins who happens to live nearby, and they always very kindly invited us and our two boys. That's the only chance our boys, including Sean with his severe autism, we would be invited to family holidays and things. So it takes a lot of courage for us even to attend a sort of extended family event that still makes us feel very self-conscious that we're going to be the odd man out. We're going to disrupt an event. So that went over the years, but we would go, we would go for a Christmas event or a Thanksgiving event, and it was great for our sons. And everybody was very welcoming to Sean, despite all his autism. The people were great. But as the years went on and my uncle and aunt passed away, it was just the cousins, and they would invite us to family events. And it might be kind of a farther drive away. We thought, oh, that might be stressful for our son. And I have to say, this is a funny thing. Even up to 2 or 3 years ago, we're like, oh gosh, we don't see that extended family anymore. It's good for our boys to also see those family members. But I would get an invitation and I would be writing, oh, sorry, we can't go text or email. And I'd be in tears because even after all this, after all these years, the thought of the exhaustion of trying to drive far away and then show up at a place where we worry that Sean's going to have a hard time and maybe he's going to have a behavior issue, maybe he's going to have a meltdown. I would be in tears. Here I am, the hiking autism lady and leading, but I would be in tears of just the exhaustion emotionally of trying to face taking Sean out in the world, even in a friendly environment. It just lasts for a long time. So I can say successfully, this past weekend, there was sort of an important family event for that extended family with the cousins things. And we said, that's it, we're going to go. And we just got ourselves up and we went, and Sean did great. And he had a couple of little autism outburst things, just mini ones, but everybody was great. And people are very understanding. But that's in a known environment. And Crystal, what you're saying is true, that there is more understanding, and people are really wonderful compared to just from lack of understanding. We have to say that people not understanding is part of the problem. It's not mean-spirited necessarily, but so that was one point, is that even for our family, it's hard and it's an ongoing challenge. But the other specific point I wanted to mention is on the theme that you were talking about this awareness is growing and that more people have autism or being diagnosed. So it's a growing situation. So that should mean that we have more understanding and support and awareness. And that is true to a degree. But one of the people that works in this community here, her name is Jill Escher, Escher. I'll just say it because she's a really dynamo who does a lot for autism and a lot for the severe autism community. And she just wrote an article, which I thought, boy, I wish everybody could read this. And it was called The Autism Surge. And it was talking about ongoing issues. It was a great article, but it mentioned, even with the awareness and even with more people being diagnosed, it still leaves us with people who don't understand. That's okay, but it still leaves us with our hands full of actual challenges that are difficult in caring for our family members or caring for ourselves as caregivers, because some of us are getting, as we get older, we may not be able to care for him as well. Then we worry what happens when we're older and not able to care for him as much. So there's a lot of challenges that it helps to have the added awareness, but this large number of more and more people being diagnosed with, and more people like Sean who are aging out of school because the school system guarantees you 5 days a week of some activity. When you age out at 21 or 22, you can just fall into a black hole. And that brings us back to the whole pandemic thing we mentioned, was that the people who went back to normal as the pandemic world opened up again, for those of us with disability issues, the support system has not bounced back because people cannot afford to live on the caregiver pay levels. And so that's one huge issue that we're seeing affects our daily life. They cannot get enough staff to go back to full time at the special needs care facilities. So maybe you two have seen something along those lines as well.
Definitely, it goes back to what I was saying. It's kind of like you remember that, right? Those issues haven't changed. They're still here, and there's still something we're dealing with, But so many people have forgotten it, or kind of just like in the past, brushing under the rug and go about their lives because it doesn't bother, it doesn't deal with me. But it's such a bad place to be in because you can be disabled at any second,
Oh yeah,
you can have a new diagnosis at any time.
right. Yeah, I think there's a difference between you two have talked to me, like in our previous conversation, talk about the difference between if this has been something that you've dealt with for many, many years, or if it was like a sudden onset or a later onset in life, how you deal with it is different. And yeah, the sudden onset in adulthood is a big shock for people. And all of a
Yep.
sudden they're enlightened with, oh, they're look at what these other people have
Yeah.
been dealing with their whole lives,
Yeah.
but they weren't aware of that before.
And then you also mentioned the support systems that as you age and that he's not going to have anymore, or not to the ability you can be now, right? Um, and eventually, and that's what we want to do. We want to enlighten people and explain the issues, show them those things. And we're not the experts at all. So we want to share the issues, and then hopefully an expert will be watching and say, hey, maybe we need to figure out how to make that different, because we want to build a world where when those parents and support systems aren't there anymore, there needs to be,
What's going to happen to our kids? I mean,
yeah,
this is really
yeah. And that can
And it's
mean emotional, physical, and mental support from all sides.
and
We
it's
can make sure we got to make sure all of that is in place. And while those things are not going to be perfect, they certainly need to be a lot better than they are now.
and it's very
And
much a sorry. Sorry.
and
Better.
also coming from the pandemic, and that too, um, if you remember any of that, and then you can't take away from what you learned from that process, and you can't apply that to what you see, the issues you've seen, the disparities and all the inequality stuff going on. If you can't remember any of that, or you weren't able to take anything away from that, then oh, it's really sad, and it certainly helps Mark and I be able to discern who we want to keep in contact with, and who's really paying attention to the issues, who's really listening to, who really wants to be a problem solver, who really has a good heart. You know, that's huge. Go ahead, Mark.
Um, Thank you. Yeah, a lot of during the pandemic, we sat back and watched a lot of big companies, especially just not even pay attention, just get rich off of other people's misery, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
yeah,
That's still a thing, somewhat. It's
yeah.
getting better. Slowly things are getting, somewhat, some companies are getting better. But it's not all going to happen at once. I mean, there's um, levels.
well,
People can,
that's
yeah.
what I mean. What you're just saying, it's not all gonna. Is it? As you both were speaking, I'm thinking the clock is always ticking, right? So as a parent, so you two have whatever your issues are that you deal with, whatever it is in your life, whether it's related to disability or not, you're like, oh gosh, here I am at this point in my life. I'm a parent, or I'm a child of older parents, and or for my own life, what do I want to do? And that clock ticks along. And for me as a parent, it's like, oh, how am I going to help my son? And that it's like the sand, the hourglass sand is draining very quickly. And same for myself as a person. Like, you can't just be a special needs parent. You actually have to be a person for yourself as well. And all of that is, life goes away in these segments of time. And so, like, what is it that you want to accomplish? Like, you two are working on something that's going to help other people be more aware that maybe bit by bit there will be a better situation for everybody with disabilities, or at least with certain pockets of it. But as a parent, and I say this usually at once in every interview, I try to say, my initial thought of what is my job as a parent. And I thought when I first had kids that success as a parent is measured by, they don't have to go to a fancy university. They don't have to get a fancy job. Success as a parent is that you were able to get your child to a place where they're an independent, functional adult. That if I was gone, my child would be okay. They would be able to, work enough to feed themselves and have a roof over their head. Just the very basics. That if you could do that for your kid, you succeeded as a parent. Well, I on that basis, I'm a failure. I cannot do that for my son, Sean. He's 26, unless some miracle happens. And I'm not saying that miracles can't happen. Maybe it will. But at this point, it does not look likely that he will ever be able to live on his own. We can't even leave him alone for 10 minutes in the house. We would never leave him unsupervised in our house for 5 minutes. He always has somebody to keep an eye for safety things. But then you have to shift your idea of what, then what is your job as a parent, and or any caregiver who loves somebody with a disability. And so then I have to shift gears and think, oh, how can I create an environment where when I'm gone and my husband is gone, somehow we'll believe that there will be a caring, safe environment for our son. And as you said, people kind of forget that the things people learned during the pandemic about awareness of this isolation and things we had, where everybody needed more help. Well, now we're back to where we were, and it's very, very slow going to keep that awareness up and to actually put concrete things in place. So your podcast is one way to really help the awareness and talk about these things. But putting concrete, helpful, logistical things in place is really tough, even for very smart, motivated people. It's slow going.
I think that that it's a function of the society we live in, and the whole system and the whole foundation is broken. Because like there are certainly good parts of it and great parts of it even that allow people to thrive, but I'm speaking to independence and but if you're a mom feeling like you're a failure and the society is expecting you to be independent, you're all on your own with no support from anyone, there's something wrong with that picture. Whereas in other countries like in Africa, or I don't know how it is in Japan, maybe in parts of India, if something happens to the parents, the whole village steps in and does what they need to do. It's not that the kid goes out and says, oh, can you help me? Can you help me? The people have to step in and do that. Right? And we just don't have that in this society we're in.
No.
The everyday person does not understand how the most basic things can be a challenge. So, for example, sometimes my husband is teaching at the museum on a Saturday because he's an arts guy and he teaches at one of our local museums. He works there sometimes on Saturdays. So on Saturdays, I might be alone with our 26-year-old son who outweighs me by 30 pounds and he's taller than me. And I have to work out to just be able to guide him if I need to, but he's pretty good. He's my favorite hiking buddy. We go out, we have a great time walking. But simple fact of life, if I'm out for a hike someplace, at some point on that trip, either when we first park or when we get ready to go, I want to use the restroom and go to the bathroom. I have a 26-year-old young man in tow with me. So, and maybe he wants to use the restroom. And there is not, first of all, we have to choose a place that has bathrooms, right? But in modern days, there's been more like family bathrooms where there's, you see a lot more awareness that like, hey, you might have family members that need to help, maybe an aging parent, or maybe it's a family member in a wheelchair that you need that bigger bathroom that's just their bathroom. Sometimes we see that, but usually we don't. So in terms of like, I get very anxious thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to take my son into the men's room because then the men would be weirded out by me going in there. And I'm like, well, I have this 26-year-old young man and I'm going to drag him into the ladies' room. So I have to overcome that every time I'm out alone with my son. And people don't think that should be a big deal, but it is. And so when I scout out the bathrooms and I see there's the ladies' room, sometimes what I do is I'll kind of verbalize, and or somebody else called, one of his helpers used to call it playing the autism card, but it's kind of a way to make people aware of what's going on. If I have to stand in line at a ladies' room, at the women's restroom with my son holding his arm, I just say, I will sort of chit chat with him out loud saying, okay, Shawnee, wait, we're going to we'll wait for the disabilities, the big stall to open. And then the women in line understand that I have a disabled family member and that we don't have any other choice. That's what we have to do. But, every single time I do that, I worry that somebody is going to be either uncomfortable with us standing in line or angry with us. And you know what? Everybody's wonderful every time. People are very kind. They say nothing or they give a nod of the head with a friendly smile. But I worry about that every time. And people don't realize the anxiety and it's overwhelming to try to do simple things out in the world, and people don't realize that that's a hard thing.
If I can also, I wrote down, okay, so I've been having some interesting conversations about a topic dealing with autism. And in this community, it goes back and forth. It's an argument within the autism community. And I wanted to know your outlook on it. Some autistic people they prefer to use the hashtag or the openly say I'm actually autistic. And then you have people who have maybe not been diagnosed, but they definitely have some of the same statistics or same characteristics. And it's a hard one to, I see both sides, I guess, but what are your thoughts on it?
That is a great topic. Yeah, sorry about the dinging here. That's one setting I can't turn on. Yeah, that is a really great topic. And so I am a content producer with a website that relates to autism. And, I follow these. So in one sense, I follow along and watch that. And it shifts and changes over the years. On the flip side of it, I was like, I'm in the trenches. People can have these arguments about this, that, and the other thing about who should be acknowledged as autistic or not. And I sit back and say, you know what? Walk a mile in my shoes. Every hour of my day is controlled or affected by my son's severe autism, which he has no ability to control, and we do our best with. But all of you guys having these arguments doesn't really match up with the experience of this. Is a thing that's come up from that very thing. The difference between high functioning, very bright, capable, functional, can have a job, graduated from regular school, maybe they did get a diagnosis of being at the high end of the spectrum, like Asperger's or something. Maybe they got into their 30s and 40s or 50s and had never had a diagnosis, but they realized by reading stuff that, oh, I think I'm on the spectrum. Well, I think a lot of people are a little bit on the spectrum. I think I'm a little on the spectrum.
Everybody.
Right. People have some of those traits. A lot of people in my family do, not that they've been diagnosed. So that higher end arguing about if you didn't get an official diagnosis, you don't count, or another hashtag besides the Actually Autistic is neurodivergent, or then there's autism awareness, autism acceptance, and these little mini fights break out. And I always kind of say, well, that's a great luxury for you to all fight about it. You could be helping each other and not making an argument about who counts and who doesn't. Because the thing that has come out of all those arguments at the high end amongst people who are articulate enough to talk about that is the hidden people in the background are the people affected by either, we call it profound autism or severe autism. My son, Sean, cannot stand up and have a conversation about this. He can't say, hey, stop arguing about this, guys. Some of us are really in the trenches here, just trying to get through an hour of every day. So for those of us dealing with a very profound level of autism, I'm like, okay, you guys can have that argument about there, but it's not really moving anything forward, and
I totally agree. Totally agree.
Okay. But and then there is a bit again from that argument that you're talking about. A thing that has come out is a little bit of a headbutting between just that sense of, hey, I can talk about it and I take pride in my neurodivergent brain and this is a plus for me. That's great. I have most of my life has been spent with very smart engineers, scientists, or musicians or artists who I think are all a little bit on the spectrum. Great. That's my tribe. And I appreciate all those differences. That's what I grew up in. So the spectrum thing is like, it looks like a plus for me because I feel like the creative, interesting people, I know a lot of them are somewhere on the spectrum, but it doesn't mean that you can argue that, you don't get to claim any understanding of that or any part of it for yourself. And what it leaves all of the silent, unvoiced people like my son down by the wayside in the mud puddle because they're not thinking about kids who can't speak for themselves. So that's where those of us and there are many of us, but our voices and our children's voices are less heard in those arguments because we can't join it. Our kids have no voice. So
what you just said perfectly is a sentiment to what they were talking about, the back and forth. And here I am in the middle trying to
like you say, there's good points on either side. I understand both of those feelings.
And it's like, take what you see from this side, take what you see from this side, work together and come to make people's lives better. Don't find things to argue when further. There's enough people that that are trying to divide everything. So what if you're labeled different or not labeled or whatever? You're all neurodivergent.
Sure.
And
that's right.
Find a way to work together in advance society.
Yes, it doesn't have to be the autism spectrum to say neurodivergent. We all, what if you have a speech processing issue that's not autism? So, everybody's got something. And so we could all work together and not argue about who gets credit for it,
Right.
Right.
Because we would certainly not be where we are as a society without those neurodivergent minds and
Right.
those engineers and all those technical people that you spoke about.
So your point is great because it brings up the next thing, which is, and this reflects way back to what Mark was talking about earlier, a little different view on it, but that what's normal and what has value or doesn't have value. So, oh yeah, Einstein was probably autistic. Well, he was valuable because he was a genius. And so if you were on the spectrum and you were somebody like Einstein, well, that's really great. That was valuable. Well, so then somebody like my son, Sean, who actually is a bright guy in his own way, it's just not connected with the world, and not function. He has a lot of challenges, but he, in his own right, is a very smart guy, and he's a loving person, and he's fun when he's not causing trouble. And in his own right, he is a valuable person who we love. He's a lovable person who has whatever he has to offer to the world. And we can't just look at high functioning and low functioning as valuable and not valuable. Each person, like Mark said, in other cultures, the person who was very different, maybe in some Aboriginal cultures, those people who were very different were looked at sort of in a special high regard as bringing some special magic or special ambiance to their community. I mean, it's very easy to feel like low functioning people are not valuable, but as a mom of somebody who has such challenges, I can't look at it that way. He has to feel loved every day, and that when he goes to his program, that somebody's going to be happy he's there.
Yeah.
Further to that, that's a good point, Lisa. Further to that, actually autistic conversation, depending on which side it's from, I guess, it seems like a very reactive thing, like the world has excluded us, so we're gonna invent this hashtag to exclude the people we don't like,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And
And
that exactly
it's not gonna get anywhere because it's just repeating the same pattern.
It's counterproductive, right? They're doing the same thing they were upset about people doing. That's really true. Yeah, that's right.
When Mark and I initially talked about it, I was upset because it seemed to me very passive aggressive.
Oh yeah.
Like, I'm actually autistic. You're not,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of othering
Oh yeah,
their own community.
for sure.
It was upsetting to me because it, our mission is to unite people in the disability community, regardless of their disability, not just autism.
Right.
But we don't want to see any community within the community, you know,
Mm-hmm.
othering each other.
And
Yeah.
if you look at it from just a practical standpoint, not a human uh standpoint, you just take all that out of it. Just look at it from a practical standpoint. What movement or idea or significant change has come from keeping people out?
Right.
There's none of it.
Right.
Any big movement, whether it was like political or social movement, it welcomed everybody and didn't exclude anyone.
Right. Right.
So I do,
Go ahead.
sorry,
No, go ahead.
I do also want to preface here that if anybody watching has a better explanation about actually autistic and what it really means and not the passive aggressive thing that it sounds like. Maybe that would be a good thing to comment on and join us in the conversation.
Yeah, and these things go in waves. I've been watching that kind of go up and down over the years. And again, as I always say, I'm like, all right, guys, well, you go have your argument over there. I'm going to help my son take a shower,
Right.
use the bathroom, get ready for his program. I mean, it's like, sorry, you having that argument at this level of whether you're going to include or exclude people is so unhelpful. So,
Yes.
but one of the experiences I've had in the sort of the Hiking Autism website, it's just a website of information, and that just always has a welcoming message to everyone. It really isn't even geared towards autism specifically, just kind of has the name, but that website really has weekly messages that are uplifting for anybody, whether we had a disability or just facing a tough challenge in life. So the website message is just generally an uplifting thing for all people. But the other volunteer work I do for the Autism Society, leading people on hikes, now I've been doing that for 3 or 4 years. And that's very interesting because one of the things that's come up is, well, I always say, I'm leading families with an autistic family member on hikes. But what we sometimes get is just individual adults who are on the spectrum, who are able to drive, hold down a job, but they have a lot of challenges with finding social interaction. And they may not have, they may not be as comfortable in the everyday social life that they might find with their coworkers. So they'll see a hike for the hiking, the Autism Society listed, and they say, I want to join the hike. So sometimes we'll get individual adults to join the hikes. And even at that, sometimes people have a hard time feeling like they've got enough of a connection because we have so many people that show up with either young kids or adult kids like my son. So you've got parents, you've got a caregiver and a family member who's severe enough to need that help. So then when the people that might be using the Actually Autistic label or feel that they fall within that community because they know they've got some issues related to that, they'll come up and want the community of being on one of those hikes. And even within me being as trying to be helpful and open and welcoming as I am, I'm always very welcoming and enjoy having people come along, but it's harder for them to feel they have a place because so many of the people are parents with kids. And so the people dealing with the level where they could even be using the Actually Autistic hashtag, it's again a different kind of isolation because maybe they're an adult who doesn't have parents thinking that they need extra help. And it's again, I'm sure this is hard to say. Sometimes I think that the higher functioning and higher level a person is, the harder it is to get support or feel supported. Because if you see my son Sean, everybody's like, oh yeah, that kid needs help. But if you are an adult who's very bright, has a job, drives to your job, does your grocery, all those things, but maybe your issues are social interaction, that's harder to get anybody to understand you need some extra support. And so I feel that's very tough to get. It's tough to reach out and get support when you're so high functioning, people won't see that you need any help. It's harder.
And especially if you've been masking for a long time and people are not, like, you've been hiding your real issues away for so long that people don't really know that this is the thing to look out for.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Well, and so that's another great point, that issue of masking. So you can be the individual with a disability who's masking, especially like the autism one, people talk about that. But I've never heard anybody say this, but you can be a parent who is masking, because especially when kids are younger, parents don't want everybody to know how challenged their kids are, because we think, oh my gosh, if I do enough stuff, I'm going to, back in the day when this was still, we were thinking we're going to fix our kids because that's what we were told. What many of us parents we're in a sense masking by not letting people know how big our kids' challenges were. And so then it becomes a double thing. So for example, with Sean, his challenges are so big that even if we parents were trying to not let everybody see how hard things were, at some point, everybody could see it was hard, right? But here's the double whammy is if you are, for example, a teenager, say you're a teenager and you realize, geez, I sure have a lot of things on the checklist for the autism spectrum, at least, for example, like the Asperger's level of traits, where you might be having a harder time socializing or communicating. You might focus on things and not be able to steer back towards what the other person, things that can be a challenge. And again, so if you're a teenager doing it and you've learned to mask, you've already got that challenge, right? What if your parents were also masking and say, oh, no, my kid doesn't have any challenges. So then you've got the teenager who has issues and the parents who do not want to recognize their issues. So then that could become a lifelong
generational.
Yeah. You don't
And
have.
the ironic, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
The ironic thing is that you end up making more problems for them than you actually wanted to. And maybe even more problems for yourself.
Yes.
Because let's say you're out and because you don't want to bring too much attention to the issue, you don't do the things that Sean needs to maybe be soothed, and then the outbursts just get bigger.
Yes, that's right.
And
so that's totally true. Or what the choice for so many of us is, well, we're just not going to go anywhere. We're not taking him any place. So we've overcome that over the years the best we can. But again, like I said, we may have an invitation even to a family event with an understanding crowd, and I'm still emotionally overwhelmed to the point where I just can't face the exhaustion of trying to go to that event. It's just too tiring. So so you could have isolation from it or just pretending there's nothing wrong, and then it becomes a bigger issue.
I'm really glad you brought that up because in so many disability arenas, especially when they're born with their disability, it starts with the parents and how they accept their disability and the way they treat them. If they mask it and in turn teach the child that they should have to mask what they have going on, then that sets them up for failure or detrimentally just vanishing them in the future, And it's always so interesting to me to talk to different people, whether it be my age or older or younger with my counseling, to talk to people that are able to see, oh, this happened and this happened, and I don't want to do this going forward. And I want to set up a world for them when they know that they're accepted and they have the support they need now, even though I didn't do that in the past.
Well, so I think we might have touched on this exact issue. I think we might have said it in one of our previous conversations a little bit. I feel like this came up. An example of what you're talking about is, for example, when a child is born with some hearing issues. So for example, the autism, a lot of autistic kids act like a deaf person. They're not deaf, but they're having a lot of auditory processing and speech processing issues. So they function like a deaf person would, even though their hearing is fine. So in either of those cases, what you have a child with a certain level of definite hearing impairment, or you have a person on the spectrum, a kid on the spectrum who's having a lot of problems processing language. Okay, so, and I think we did mention somebody will say, as one stepping stone, you could teach your kid and the parents could learn American Sign Language, for example, some sort of a sign. It doesn't have to be whatever country, and you'd learn sign language. And many parents would say, no, We don't want to do that, especially if it was the kids on the spectrum with the speech delays, because they'll say, no, 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 we want them to just learn speaking. We don't want to do the hand symbols or like the picture systems. And I understand parents do that. I remember we did talk about that, but that extra tool can open up things that's going to unlock some of the other things that's going to allow that kid to develop. And in the meantime, as you say, it's what they need now to have some communication. So that is, and it's a tricky thing because parents get caught up in like, wait, what's the right decision? Am I going to be blocking them from learning to actually speak by letting them use sign language? And then it's this, it's the sand, the hourglass with the sand running through. The parents are like, oh my gosh, is it a mistake to spend a couple of years doing sign language? Am I going to lose there's always that decision making about you're losing time to fix things. But unfortunately, a lot of times it falls on the side of not offering the tools that will help.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is the parent trying to mask the situation instead of looking out for the child with the disability who is screaming to communicate in some way. You're disabling them from doing so. And so what that they need a board or whatever they need to speak, to be able to communicate what's going on in their mind, that why are people making that not want to happen?
Yeah. Well, here's sort of a guilty confession as a mom. Early on, okay, so for example, nowadays, if you look at TV commercials, you see all these commercials about probiotics like help digestive health, or many, you see just all these information about people with gluten-free this or dairy-free or food allergies. And now that's like the common thing. Everybody under the sun acknowledges, oh, my body doesn't work very well with this food, or I actually have a real food allergy, or they take some kind of a digestive system support and they feel better and they function better and their brains work better. And this is just like, it's like a huge commercial thing that big corporations are making money on, because turns out that, the way your digestive system works actually affects your brain and your emotions and how healthy you are. It's like, okay, well, we all accept that now because it's on every other commercial, if you watch TV. But back when Sean was younger, the sort of early end people working in special needs nutrition were saying, oh, some of the kids benefit a lot from changing what they eat. And as a parent, you've got 8 voices out of 10 saying, oh, don't listen to that crazy stuff. You already have a hard time getting your kid to eat anything, because a lot of kids on the spectrum have a very limited diet with like to an extreme level, like extreme. And the other 2 voices out of 10 will be saying, oh yeah, try that. We've heard that really works for people. Well, it wasn't until Sean was maybe, 13 or 14 before we finally really experimented pretty strongly with, that maybe he did have food allergies and maybe there would be a difference in how he felt, because he was always had like terrible cluster migraine headaches. He'd be on the floor, kicking, and it looks like a meltdown or a tantrum, but, laying on your tummy, kicking your hands or feet, banging your head, biting people, being aggressive. Well, we had this was one of those early childhood things where, do we do it or do we not do it? And it's such a hard thing to change an autistic kid's diet because they're so picky to start with. But sure enough, when he was 13 or 14, we worked really hard, and it took a while, but we figured out a couple of food items that were actually causing terrible problems for him. And I sometimes think, and I hear other parents of the same thing, I think, gosh, if we had done this when he was 3 or 4 instead of 13 or 14, that would have been an extra 10 years where he would have had an easier time, that he wasn't in physical distress, that his brain would have been less foggy and would have been functioning better. But you know what? He did better when we changed some of his food things when he was a teenager, and it's really helped him a lot. And I can only kick myself so much for not having it done
Right,
10 years
right,
earlier because it wasn't as clear. But it's the same thing with like the masking stuff for the
Yeah.
parents who
right,
don't want to admit their kid has a challenge, maybe with dyslexia or something else that they don't want to show that their kid is having a struggle with, you know?
right,
Yeah. And
right.
like we, sorry.
The,
Go ahead.
the idea is not to um, kick, our parents or anything.
Yeah.
The idea is to so that people understand masking. It's
Mhm.
not just the disability community that takes on masking, but we were brought up that way.
Mm.
And even our parents not having anything to do with disability, especially women, were
Mhm.
taught to mask,
Yeah.
and put on a face, literally,
Yes.
and put up your hair perfect and, all this stuff, what is the difference?
Yeah. It's all generational and systemic stuff that's been taught to us, like, um, no, as young parents with a newborn, a child that's having some issues,
Mhm.
right? As first time parents, maybe you're scared and you don't know what you're doing. So you're relying on the information your parents are giving you, which they got from their parents, which may be misinformed or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And you're relying on these doctors that have their own biases
Mhm.
that are giving you information based on those biases, and you're going forth and imposing them on your child.
Right, right. That's right. Well, and the thing is, we want to feel that we have good medical care or good people, guiding us for our child's care or our own health care. And I like to feel like I've always had great doctors that I've been under the care of or that my son's been under care of. You want to have faith for whatever it is in your life that you have to go, maybe it's an ingrown toenail. You still want a good person who knows how to, but
Right.
right, but when it's a more complicated stuff, for kids on the spectrum, even to this day, it's very hard to find medical people who really, really understand what autism means. Because even as Crystal, you were talking about the people doing the actually autistic and what that means. So, I laugh when I hear about these arguments and stuff because I say, well, what are you guys all claiming your claim to fame that you're actually autistic? Because autism is really just a way of saying that you have some number of a constellation of various symptoms. If you have enough things from column A and column B and column C, you could say you're on the autism spectrum. Autism in and of itself is not a disease or it's it's a way to say, oh, I have a set of neurological and biological and maybe developmental challenges that add up to a diagnosis of autism. So back in the earlier days, if my son was having terrible migraine headaches repeatedly for years, which were horrible and affected his ability to function every day, maybe one of our pediatricians early on, for lack of a better solution, they might say, well, give him some Motrin or something, but they'll say, oh, it's just part of his autism. Some people in autism have these migraines. And then like, no, a migraine or whatever other symptom or a digestive system is a physical symptom that you need to treat as that. And now we're finally having doctors who are looking at, oh, this kid has digestive system issues. Oh, they have a specific neurological issue, like maybe epilepsy or seizure conditions, or they're having some auditory processing issues, and they break it up into the specific symptoms that add up to that one person's autism thing. But in the old days, it was just, oh, that's just part of autism. Like, no, it's a specific thing that needs to be dealt with. And so that's sort of a roundabout way that comes back, like the parents masking thing. Like, even for parents, we don't really know all of what's going. It's like the blind leading the blind. It's all like sort of a mysterious mishmash of stuff that's very hard to define.
It definitely, I feel like, and not just feel like, but it's evident, in so many areas that, people have been telling people how to feel and how to ignore your instincts, ignore your inner voice and what's inside you, and do what we say instead. And I feel like if a lot of people would go back to some of that internal instinct and internal faith, stuff like that, it would be so much easier. People would be so more empathetic, and a lot of problems, not all the problems, but a lot of them would be solved.
Right. And as far as the health practitioners go, like especially doctors, there's a lot of that empathy then leads to humility in admitting that, okay, I don't quite understand this problem, so I've got to tell parents or whoever that I don't know, and this is who you should go see. But a lot of them end up, because they want to fulfill their own ego or whatever, they end up giving you a diagnosis that doesn't really apply, or they come to some wrong conclusion and think it's right, you know?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And my husband and I say this all the time. The people we most respect, whether it's the medical field or anything, are the people who have the confidence to say, I don't have the answer to that, or I'm not the best person because I don't really understand that well.
Right.
Even if they don't have a better person to recommend, I like somebody who is confident enough to say, I can't really give you a solid answer. Here's the best I can do to try to help you with that. Because when somebody gives you a false sense of confidence and gives you an answer when they know they really don't know what they're talking about, it could lead you down, the wrong track. For sure.
Yes, definitely.
And that's something to be aware of. That's why it's so important to get a second opinion and third opinion. Like, I haven't really dealt it all out with the American medical system, but up here, sometimes the danger is, there's so many going through a public medical system. There's so many people going through it that sometimes you could just get people giving you an answer because they just want to move on to the next person and get through their day.
Yeah.
It's more of a business than actually wanting to help people.
Well, that's funny because you're in Canada with that situation. And so my older son, who is very functional, ended up getting a job where his job required him to move to London. So now he's in England. And if he has a health issue, he has to go through the national health system. And so he's had a couple of experiences. And of course, we all complain about the US where insurance is expensive and the healthcare is expensive. But now that he's been there a couple of times, he was really like, geez, I really need help with something. And they're just like, no, just go, move along. You're not dying, just go away. You kind of like, or feel like there was a very long waiting list, or somebody wasn't really listening when you're like trying to refill a prescription and then they didn't get it right. And then you try to call back and you can't get the right. I mean, it's very kind of, sort of like going along the conveyor belt, just kind of pass it through the system. And so I actually, as expensive and difficult as the medical system is here, I realized, well, I'm at least grateful for the good care of, the people that we do have. I'm like, oh, well, in a way, you get what you pay for in some ways. But the problem is that not everybody can pay for good health care. But if you can manage to scrape enough to get a good physician, it's really a valuable thing. Because my son has had some experiences in England where it's great that it's there, but you don't really feel like they're looking individually sometimes, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Anything else, Mark?
Well, Lisa, it was certainly nice to speak with you and see you again. And we could talk about a lot of things for a long time. You're very easy to talk to, and yeah, we appreciate all of the support that you've given us.
For sure. Yeah, there's been a couple people, and you're definitely one of them. So we love you for it, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you too, and keep up the great work. I just still as supportive as ever. I think you're doing a great thing, and it helps me open my eyes to the world as well, of how to make things
Great.
better. So thank you both very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.